Up next in the broadcast, Korea's foreign ministry slams Tokyo for backtracking on the acknowledgement of the sexual enslavement of Korean women. Investigators are still sifting through the deadly and still mysterious building explosion in a New York City neighborhood. And the clock is ticking on a massive doctor strike planned for the end of this month, but hope remains for doctors and the government to come to an agreement before then. Primetime News begins now.
Good evening to our viewers in Korea and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Thursday, March 13th here in Seoul. I'm Lee Ju-yeol.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. There were no surprises in the final rate-setting session for outgoing Bank of Korea Governor Choong-soo, whose four-year term ends at the end of this month.
The central bank has left its key interest rate unchanged at 2.5% for the 10th straight month in March. Now, following its monthly monetary policy meeting on Thursday, the BOK said the economy at home and abroad are continuing to recover at a moderate pace, but did note the risk coming from emerging markets. The nation's inflation rate ran below the central bank's target band for the 21st straight month in February, standing at 1%. The final decision on next month's key interest rate will likely fall on Bank of Korea governor-nominee Lee Ju-yeol's shoulders.
Our Hwang Ji-hye has more on some of the challenges facing the veteran central bank official who is slated for a confirmation hearing next week.
Wrapping up his final monetary policy meeting on Thursday, Bank of Korea Governor Choong-soo said he was successful during his four-year term in giving the central bank back to the people. He added he had done his best under some difficult circumstances.
People normally say that the past 4 years represent the first and the biggest financial crisis in 100 years. The global financial market changed very rapidly.
While there has been criticism over a lack of communication with the market during his term, analysts rated Governor Kim's monetary policies as above average. The man who is now likely to be taking over the burden is Lee Ju-yeol, a veteran central bank official who's been tapped as the next governor. Experts say the main challenges for Lee will be how to cope with external risks stemming from the U.S. Federal Reserve's stimulus tapering and how to coordinate with the government to revitalize the domestic economy. They add that the new top central banker will feel a heavy responsibility as the circumstances at home and abroad are currently at odds.
The new governor should not focus on short-term goals. Blindlessly following the government's drive to boost the local economy should also be avoided. The central bank should show leadership as a pillar of monetary policies, while communicating with the market.
Before taking office in April, nominee Lee will have to go through a parliamentary confirmation hearing next Wednesday. The National Assembly, however, does not have the power to veto Lee's appointment. Analysts say the first hearing in the Bank of Korea's 60-year history is expected to go smoothly, given that the central bank veteran has gone through similar procedures before while holding senior positions in the central bank. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Hopes that Korea and Japan would mend their strained ties were crushed on Wednesday. The much-anticipated high-level talks failed to make much progress as Japan's chief cabinet secretary continued to deny the country's wartime atrocities.
Seoul on this Thursday expressed deep regret over the remarks. Our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports.
South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs slammed Japan on Thursday for its latest offensive remarks about the victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of women.
Japan is inflicting another wound on the surviving victims of sexual enslavement by denying its military's direct involvement, which it had previously acknowledged in the Kono Statement.
The Kono Statement is a landmark apology issued by Japan in 1993 to the 200,000 or so women, mostly Korean, who were forced into sexual slavery during the Second World War. Tokyo has been backtracking on that apology in recent months by calling into question the validity of testimony given by Korean women that established the basis of the statement. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said Wednesday at a press briefing that there was no evidence that Japan forced the recruitment of women. The comments came on the same day the two neighbors were holding their first high-level talks in 8 months, which ended without results. Speculation leading up to the talks was that Japan would propose a summit with South Korea on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague later this month. More than a year into office now, President Park Geun-hye has yet to sit down with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. President Park has said she would not meet with a leader who fails to acknowledge his country's historical wrongdoings.
The South Korean government believes it is important to engage in talks when the two leaders can reach productive outcomes rather than holding talks for talk's sake.
Seoul's foreign ministry says that Japan must first take sincere steps to settle the history issues in order to hold productive talks with South Korea. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
North Korea has agreed to hold a second round of Red Cross talks with Japan next week in Shenyang, China.
NHK, Japan's public broadcaster, reports that both countries will be sending government representatives to the two-day meeting that starts next Wednesday. They're expected to follow up on progress made in the first round of talks earlier this month, when North Korea agreed to cooperate in repatriating the remains of Japanese nationals. Speculation surrounds whether the Red Cross meetings will lead to formal bilateral talks between the two governments. Korea and Canada reached a free trade agreement earlier this week, ending 9 years of tough negotiations. It will be Canada's first trade pact with an Asian nation and the 12th overall for Korea.
For more on what the bilateral pact means for Korean trade and its impact on sensitive items such as cars and beef in the nation, we bring in Dr. Kang Jun-ha, professor of law at Hongik University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Professor, what was the significance of this trade pact with Canada, and what's your overall assessment?
FTA is a process to integrate one economy to another and to expand economic territory. FTA is to describe an economic highway between those two countries by facilitating trade and investment. So by concluding Korea-Canada FTA, I think we can deepen economic ties each other. However, each FTA has some positive and negative sides. This Korea-Canada FTA, big winner is car industry. Korea-Canada agreed to gradually eliminate tariff on most goods. And right now, 6.1% tariff will be imposed on car. And car industry may export cheaper price to Canada with elimination of tariff. Not only car, but also automobile parts or components, the tariff on that item will be eliminated. Also, electronic goods, including refrigerator, washing machine, the tariff on those items also will be eliminated.
So those are the beneficiaries. So can you walk us through some of the losers then?
Most vulnerable area is agricultural industry. 40% tariff will be imposed on Canadian beef right now, and those tariffs will be eliminated gradually within 15 years. And tariff on pork products will be eliminated within 13 years. So by elimination of such a tariff, Canadian beef will compete with other countries' beef products, like US beef and Australia beef.
So some pundits say that this trade deal was a bit rushed because Korea wants to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the US-led trade pact. What are your thoughts on that? Was this rushed?
TPP is Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, is a bigger and larger FTA. Right now, 12 contracting states are participating in the negotiation. And in order to join the TPP, prior approval from the contracting states are required. Korea already expressed intention to join TPP. And in order to do that, Korea gain support from the contracting states. And by concluding Korea-Canada FTA, Canada may support Korea's position to join TPP.
Well, Korea is also aggressively pushing for other FTAs as well, most pending one being China and Japan. While not much progress is being made so far, how do you speculate how do you think the negotiations will pan out?
Well, actually, we have three FTA negotiation among those three Asian countries: Korea-Japan FTA, Korea-China FTA, and trilateral FTA negotiation, Korea, China, Japan. And as for Korea-Japan FTA, it virtually stopped due to the disagreement on core issues, level of trade liberalization. And as for Korea-China FTA, up to now, 9 negotiation rounds were held. However, we have many issues in negotiation. So both countries' delegation tried to bridge the gap in many issues, but it takes some time.
All right, Professor Kang, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure.
If everything goes according to plan, Korea will have a leaner fighting. The president
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang's Sean Lim and Lee Ju-yeol from the heart of Seoul. Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
Next general elections.
There is rising hope Korean doctors and the government will be able to talk through their differences and avert an upcoming doctors' strike planned for the last week of the month. Song Ji-san reports on some of the sticking points dividing the two sides.
Medical doctors and the governments are preparing for a meeting after Prime Minister Chung Hong-won proposed talks by March 20th to seek a compromise. The Korean Medical Association of Doctors, upset over government's plan to implement telemedicine and to set up for-profit subsidiaries, is planning a 6-day strike from March 24th unless an agreement is reached. Doctors claim the government's plan could undermine public health. The government, on the other hand, says the new telemedicine system is necessary to offer benefits to the elderly, disabled, and patients in remote areas, along with people with chronic diseases. The doctors are also calling for a reform of the current public health plan, saying it earns them unreasonably low consultation fees, but at the same time burdens the public because of the high costs for services not covered by the state-run health system. Many Koreans rely on private insurance as the public health plan does not cover the full range of expenses. Medical fees in Korea are relatively cheaper than those of most developed countries. For example, artery bypass surgery in Korea costs 1/6 of what it costs in the US. Hospitals have been accused of offsetting their losses by advising patients that they undergo costly checkup services like the MRIs. An OECD survey shows the pace of rise in medical spending is the second highest in Korea among member countries. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Koreans spend more than 3.5 hours a day staring into their smartphones. That's according to market research firm HSAD, which asked 1,000 Koreans about their daily use of smartphones, PCs, and televisions. On average, Koreans spend 3 hours and 34 minutes a day using their smartphones, 3 hours watching television, and 48 minutes on the computer. Perhaps not surprisingly, people in their 20s use smartphones the most, clocking in at an average of 5 hours and 15 minutes a day, while people in their 50s spent the least amount of time at a little over 2 hours per day. It could be just a matter of time before we see electric vehicle charging stations at retail outlets in the nation. Our Kim Ji-yeon tells us a trio of private companies plans to install them by the end of this year.
Drivers will soon be able to recharge their electric vehicles at E-Mart, the largest retail outlet in Korea. E-Mart is aiming to install 60 EV charging stations at stores around the country by the end of this year. An E-Mart official says that an electric car can run for around 49 kilometers, roughly a 40-minute drive on a 1-hour charge, which may be useful for people driving short distances after shopping for groceries and heading straight home. To build the stations, E-Mart teamed up with POSCO, Korea's largest steelmaker, and BMW Korea, which is releasing its new i3 electric vehicle next month. The three companies plan to build 40 additional EV charging stations at E-Mart by next year. This is the first such attempt by private companies to facilitate the use of electric vehicles in Korea. The country's existing 1,900 EV charging stations were built with government support. E-Mart's new EV charging stations will be able to accommodate all kinds of electric vehicles. All users will have to do is purchase a membership card. Users will be able to find the charging station locations through a smartphone app provided by POSCO or the navigation system in the new i3. The move to launch the new stations comes ahead of the International Electric Vehicle Expo, scheduled to start Saturday at the International Convention Center on Jeju Island. More than 2,000 people are expected to attend the event, including personnel from 40 related industries, including Kia Motors and BMW. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And moving now to some of the top stories on the global front, from a massive explosion that tore through 2 buildings in New York to the closing of China's National People's Congress. We go over to our Paul Lee at the News Center.
So, Paul, let's start with the deadly blast in East Harlem. What's the latest on that?
Well, the death toll from Wednesday's New York City building explosion has risen to 7, with over 60 others reported injured. Emergency crews have been searching through the rubble all night to rescue any missing survivors. The exact cause has not been determined yet, but authorities suspect a gas leak is to blame. Our Choong-soo has the details.
New York City's mayor has called it a tragedy of the worst kind. 2 buildings in the city's East Harlem neighborhood completely collapsed on Wednesday morning local time. Thick smoke and debris covered the neighborhood. Nearby structures were badly damaged by what witnesses say was a massive explosion. Residents close to the incident have been evacuated.
It blew out some of our windows, like in the back of the building. The whole courtyard had glass in it, and like my apartment shook.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio rushed to the scene to take stock of the situation and spoke at an emergency press conference.
There was a major explosion that destroyed 2 buildings. Explosion was based on a gas leak. The impact affected buildings around the 2 that were destroyed. Very heavy impact on the surrounding buildings. A heavy fire has ensued as well.
A resident in an adjacent building reported smelling gas just 15 minutes prior to the blast. Other people in the neighborhood have also told reporters they had smelled a gas-like odor since the day before. The New York Fire Department has classified the incident as the highest threat level possible. Around 250 firemen were on site after it occurred, and there are dozens still searching for the missing, feared trapped under the debris. Mayor de Blasio praised the city's fire department for its quick response, especially as there was no indication in time to save people. The White House says President Barack Obama was briefed on the incident and has sent his condolences to the victims' families. Choong-soo, Arirang News.
Now, moving now to day 6 on that missing Malaysian plane. Paul, any breakthrough in the search?
Authorities say there is still no sign of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, which vanished Saturday while carrying 239 people. Hopes were raised earlier yesterday as Chinese satellite images showed possible signs of debris from the missing Boeing 777 in the East China Sea. Civil aviation officials from Vietnam and Malaysia said Thursday they sent planes to inspect the designated area, but said nothing has been found so far. Adding to the mystery, the Wall Street Journal reported that U.S. investigators suspect the plane flew up to 4 hours after it lost contact with air traffic controllers. This based on data that was automatically transmitted from its engines to its manufacturer. That would mean the jetliner could have potentially reached as far as the Indian Ocean or even the Arabian Sea. Meanwhile, authorities have not ruled out the possibility of mechanical failure, pilot error, sabotage, or terrorism.
And over in China, the country's top legislature has wrapped up its annual session. Can you give us the details?
The nearly 3,000 delegates of the National People's Congress ended their 10-day session this Thursday. Chinese Premier Lee Ju-yeol said this year's event was successful in defining major missions and setting specific goals, which including fighting corruption, setting a target for economic growth, and tackling chronic pollution.
Now, speaking of the economy, what did the Chinese leadership have to say about the government's growth forecast this year?
Well, Lee said China would be able to ensure a reasonable economic growth rate of 7.5% for 2014, while also acknowledging the severe challenges facing the economy, namely downward pressure. He also outlined measures the NPC laid out for tackling pollution. They included shutting down 50,000 coal furnaces, reducing emissions from coal-burning power plants, and removing old high-emission cars from roads.
And Paul, I understand that in the Middle East, Israel has carried out a massive airstrike in the Gaza Strip.
Yes, Israel's military says it launched 29 airstrikes against targets in Gaza, the single biggest attack since 2012. Israeli police said Palestinian militants on Wednesday fired about 60 rockets at cities in the southern part of the country, following a series of cross-border clashes this past week. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he had warned of a forceful response. No casualties have been reported on either side. The Islamic Jihad movement has claimed responsibility for firing on Israeli civilians, saying it was in retaliation for Israel killing 3 of its members a day earlier. Back to you in the studio.
All right, thanks, Paul. For the wrap-up of stories making headlines around the world, we'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. This is Stephen Che. Now, the world #1 ladies golfer Park In-bi is looking to do what she couldn't last season. She has her sights set on completing her career Grand Slam by winning the Women's British Open in July. At the media event for the first major of 2014, the Kraft Nabisco Championship, Park also said she's gunning to defend her title at Mission Hills in California early next month. And getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, if she can also manage to win the Evian Championship in September, she'll also achieve the Super Grand Slam. Well, it's all possible as Park has gotten off to a super start this season by winning the World Ladies Championship last weekend, as well as finishing in the top 5 in her 2 previous starts. And moving on, the thunderous roar of supercharged engines, the smell of burnt rubber, and of course, the best racers in the world. Formula One racing is finally here. The 2014 season is upon us with the opening race, the Australian Grand Prix, opening in Melbourne on Friday. 4-time world champ Sebastian Vettel, along with Fernando Alonso, Mark Webber, and other world-class drivers, will suit up for qualifying on Saturday before the main race on Sunday. Now for Champions League football, Lionel Messi has rewritten the record books yet again as Barcelona ousted Manchester City from the tournament. Messi's opening goal in the 67th minute put him on top of the list of players with the most Champions League goals with a single team, with 67, surpassing Raul on the list. Meanwhile, Barca ended up beating Man City in the match 2-1, giving them the 4-1 win in aggregates and advanced to the quarterfinals. Now let's get to playoff action in the KBL. The SK Knights hosted the Goyang Orions in Seoul for Game 1. Now they're toe-to-toe to start the game, but SK blows it open in the second, taking a 48-31 lead into the half. Now Anthony Richardson and Heo Il-young presses an Orions comeback in the third, but SK's combo of Kim Sun-young and Aaron Haynes locks it down, and they take the lead and lead the Knights to the Game 1 win, 84-73. Now it's pro volleyball in the V-League. Russian Cash hosted Samsung Hwajae in Ansan. Now Samsung is locked at first place, but it's 6th place Russian Cash that gets the first set. Now Samsung powers back for 2 sets in a row before the home team gets one back to force the deciding set. There, Russian Cash dominates for the final win of the season at home, 3-2. And that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
Flowers have begun to bloom in the southern regions, which means spring isn't far off.
For more, let's connect live to our Kim Bo-kyung standing by at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Good evening, guys. Every year at this time, we look forward to the blooming of the cherry blossoms, and this year it'll come 2 to 3 days later than usual due to the cold snap we had earlier this month. The blooming will begin in Jeju on March 27th and spread to the southern regions by early April and reach Seoul by April 11th. Mark your calendars as the peak times will only last for about a week. Well, tomorrow's morning lows will drop about 5 degrees compared to today, dipping to -1. But some good news that daytime highs will jump to the mid-teens over the weekend. However, another round of spring showers awaits us next week. Taking a look at the current conditions, due to a low pressure trough, parts of the southern regions are still seeing spring showers at this hour. And less than 5 millimeters will fall through early tomorrow morning. Currently, a strong wind watch has been issued on Dokdo and Ulleungdo Islands, so our residents there should take extra care. Looking ahead at Friday's readings, Seoul and Busan reach 9 degrees while Gwangju makes it to 8. Moving on to other regions, Jeju starts off the day at 4 degrees with a high of 9, while Dokdo tops out at 4. Well, that's all for now, but I'll be back with more updates after midnight.
Thanks, Bo-kyung. And that's our broadcast on this Thursday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.